She had barely caught her breath after 14 hours of labor when the world she believed in cracked open without warning. The room still echoed with the fragile cries of her newborn son, a sound so pure it should have filled the air with warmth. Instead, it was cut in half by a voice she once trusted more than her own heartbeat. Cold, flat, unrecognizable. Get a DNA test. This baby can't be mine. For a second time didn't just slow down, it stopped. The fluorescent lights above seemed harsher. The steady beeping of hospital monitors, suddenly too loud, too sharp, like reality itself, was turning against her. She tightened her arms around her baby instinctively, as if the accusation alone could take him away. Her body ached in ways she didn't know were possible. Every muscle torn open from bringing life into the world, yet none of that pain compared to what those words did to her chest. This wasn't anger. It wasn't even disbelief at first. It was something deeper, like watching the foundation of your life collapse in silence. She searched his face, desperate for a hint of hesitation, a flicker of regret, anything that could tell her this was a cruel joke born from stress and fear. But there was nothing. No confusion. No doubt. Just certainty. And that was what terrified her most. Because certainty meant he had already decided who she was in his mind. The nurse froze beside the bed, unsure whether to comfort the mother or pretend she hadn't heard anything. Her own mother stood by the window, breath caught somewhere between rage and heartbreak, unable to step forward, unable to speak. And there she was, lying there, holding a child who had only been alive for minutes, already forced into a battle he didn't understand. "I never cheated on you," she whispered, her voice fragile, barely strong enough to exist. But he didn't soften. He didn't even step closer. If anything, he leaned back slightly, like the distance could protect him from something he had already decided was true. In that moment, something shifted, not just in the room, but inside her. Because the man standing in front of her no longer felt like her husband. He felt like a stranger wearing his face. And the most terrifying part, the calmness. No shouting, no accusations thrown in anger, just a quiet, controlled sentence that destroyed everything. People think betrayal comes loudly, with slammed doors and broken glass. But the worst kind arrives like this, quiet, precise, leaving no space to defend yourself. As the baby stirred softly against her chest, unaware of the storm he had been born into, she realized something she wasn't ready to accept. This moment was not just about doubt. It was the beginning of something much darker. And if you think this is where the story ends, you're not ready for what comes next. Because 5 days later, everything would change in a way no one in that room could have imagined. If this moment hit you even a little, stay with me, follow, to see how the truth unfolds. Because the next part will completely change how you see this story. And maybe even how you see trust itself. You'd think the worst moment had already passed the second those words left his mouth. But what came after was far more unsettling. Because anger fades, shock breaks, but silence. Silence stretches, suffocates, and slowly turns everything toxic. The hospital room didn't explode into chaos. It didn't fill with shouting or dramatic confrontation. Instead, it became unnaturally quiet, like everyone inside it was holding their breath, waiting for something worse to happen. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He didn't apologize. He simply withdrew. That was the first sign something wasn't right. He stood at a distance, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the baby. Not with confusion, but with something colder, something calculated. Like he wasn't looking at his son, but at a problem he needed to solve. Every movement he made felt deliberate. Controlled. Too controlled. The kind of calm that doesn't comfort, it warns. Nurses came in and out, checking vitals, adjusting blankets, pretending not to notice the tension thickening the air, but their eyes always lingered a second too long. Even they could feel it. Something was off. Her mother tried to confront him, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief, but he brushed it off like it didn't matter, like none of this deserved an emotional response. That indifference cut deeper than any accusation, because it meant he wasn't reacting, he was executing something already planned. And that realization began to settle in her chest, like a slow, heavy weight. This wasn't a man spiraling out of fear. This was a man following through on something he had already decided long before this moment. Later that night, when the room dimmed, and the hallway lights softened into a distant glow. She lay awake listening to her baby breathe beside her. Every tiny sound grounded her, kept her from breaking completely. But where was he? Not beside her, not holding their child. A nurse quietly mentioned she had seen him sitting alone in his car for hours, not crying, not calling anyone, just sitting there, still, thinking. And that was when the fear shifted. It was no longer about what he said, it was about what he wasn't saying. The next morning only deepened the unease. He refused to sign the birth certificate, refused to engage in any real conversation. Every answer was short-clipped, attached, like he was already emotionally gone. And yet he didn't leave. That contradiction made everything worse. Because if he truly believed what he said, why stay? Why linger in this strange, cold presence that filled the room like invisible smoke? By the second day, the tension had evolved into something unbearable. Conversations felt like walking on broken glass. Even silence felt loud. Then came something even stranger. She caught him in the hallway, speaking in hushed tones to someone she couldn't fully see. Just fragments of words. Not here. You said it was handled. Her heart skipped. Handled. What was being handled? When she asked him, he dismissed it instantly, not even bothering to look up, as if the question itself was irrelevant. That wasn't avoidance. That was deflection. And deep down she knew the difference. Everything about him felt rehearsed. The way he spoke, the way he avoided eye contact at certain moments but held it too long at others. The way he stayed calm when any normal person would have cracked under pressure. This wasn't a reaction. This was behavior. A pattern. And the scariest part, she realized she didn't recognize it. Not in the man she married. Not in the life they built together. It was like watching someone slowly remove a mask you didn't even know existed. And with every hour that passed, the distance between them didn't just grow, it transformed into something unbridgeable, something final. If you're starting to feel that something deeper is wrong here, trust that instinct. Because this wasn't just tension, it was the beginning of a truth far more dangerous than suspicion. Comment 2 if you want the next part, because what she discovers next will change everything you thought you understood. What if the real betrayal wasn't the accusation, but everything hidden behind it? Because while she was still trying to understand why the man she loved could look at their newborn and deny him so coldly, something else was already unraveling quietly, carefully, and far more dangerously. It started with a single word she wasn't supposed to hear: refinance. Not shouted, not explained, just slipped into a hushed phone call in the hallway like it meant nothing. But something about the way he said it made her stop, made her listen. Once she signs were done, her chest tightened instantly. Signs what done? With what? When he noticed her standing there, his reaction wasn't guilt. It was irritation. Sharp, controlled irritation. Like she had interrupted something important. That was the moment her confusion turned into something sharper: suspicion. Because this wasn't just about distance anymore. This was about secrecy. And secrecy has a pattern. That night, lying in the dim hospital room, she replayed every detail of the past months in her mind. The way he had insisted on handling all the finances. The way he encouraged her to use electronic signatures because pregnancy had left her exhausted. The way he took calls outside, lowering his voice whenever she walked into the room. At the time, it all felt like care, support, protection. But now, it felt like control. The next morning, when he stepped out to grab coffee, she did something she had never done before. She called the bank. Her hands trembled as she held the phone, her heart pounding harder with every second of silence on the other end. When the woman finally spoke, her voice was careful. Too careful. There was a home equity withdrawal filed 3 months ago. For a moment, nothing made sense. Withdrawal from their home? That wasn't possible. They hadn't discussed anything like that. At least, she didn't think they had. Your signature is on the authorization forms. That was the moment everything inside her went cold. Because she had never signed anything. Not knowingly, not consciously. The room seemed to spin as reality began to rearrange itself into something unrecognizable. Memories she once trusted started to shift, twisting into something darker. Documents he asked her to quickly approve. Emails she barely read. Moments she was too tired to question. Suddenly, it all fit, but not in the way she wanted. It wasn't care. It was access. And he had taken it. Not once. Not accidentally. Repeatedly. Carefully. Intentionally. By the time he returned to the room, smiling faintly, like nothing had changed, she was no longer the same woman who had been lying there hours earlier. Something had cracked open inside her. Not fear. Not yet, but awareness. A quiet, growing clarity that the man she trusted most might not just be hiding something, he might be building something behind her back. And the worst part, he thought she still didn't know. He thought she was still confused, still fragile, still easy to control. But something had shifted, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Every word becomes suspicious. Every silence becomes loud. Every "I was just trying to protect you" starts to sound like a lie wrapped in kindness. And as she looked at him sitting there calm, composed, scrolling through his phone, like the world wasn't slowly collapsing around them, one terrifying thought settled in her mind: this wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. If this moment made you question everything you've ever trusted, don't ignore that feeling. Because what she uncovers next will go far beyond money, far beyond lies. Like and subscribe to follow the next part, because the truth behind his actions is darker than you think. Right when she thought things couldn't feel more unreal, the moment arrived that proved she was only seeing the surface. Because sometimes the truth doesn't reveal itself gradually, it breaks in all at once. It was supposed to be a normal hospital morning. Pale sunlight filtered through the blinds, the machines hummed steadily, and her baby rested quietly against her chest. For a few fragile seconds, it almost felt peaceful. Almost. Then came the knock. Not loud, not urgent, but something about it felt wrong. When the door opened, Dr. Howard stepped in, holding a thick medical file, his expression unreadable at first glance. But the second his eyes landed on her husband, everything changed. The color drained from his face so quickly it was impossible to ignore. His grip tightened around the file. His body stiffened. And in that split second, she felt it, that invisible shift in the room again. The kind that doesn't come from emotion, but from recognition. He didn't greet anyone, didn't check on her, or the baby. He just stared. Then slowly, almost too carefully, he took a step back toward the door. "Lock the door," he said quietly. The nurse froze. "Call the police." Now. For a few seconds, no one moved. The words didn't make sense. Police. In a maternity room, it felt absurd, unreal. But the look in his eyes said otherwise. This wasn't confusion, this was certainty. Her heart started pounding so hard, it hurt against the stitches in her body. "What's going on?" she whispered, her voice barely steady. No one answered. Her husband was the first to move. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, standing up slowly. But something had changed in him too. The calm, controlled tone he had been hiding behind for days cracked just slightly. Not fear, but tension. Sharp, dangerous. The kind of tension that doesn't wait. The doctor didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just stepped back further into the hallway, never taking his eyes off him. Security is already on the way. And then it happened. Fast. Too fast. 1 second he was standing there. The next he lunged toward the door. The movement was so sudden the nurse screamed. The metal tray crashed to the floor as he shoved past the doctor and bolted into the hallway. Everything exploded into noise, footsteps, shouting, chaos flooding the silence that had suffocated the room for days. "Stop," someone yelled. "Security." The baby woke up crying in her arms, but she couldn't move. Her body was frozen, her mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. Then she heard it. A sharp electric crack. A body hitting the ground, voices shouting commands, hands behind your back. Her entire world seemed to tilt sideways. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't a private argument gone too far. This was something else. Something real. Something she had never even considered. Within moments, uniformed, officers rushed into the room, followed by a woman in plain clothes, calm, but focused, a badge clipped to her belt. The energy shifted again, this time, not tense, but official. Controlled. Final. "Mrs. Carter," the woman asked gently. She nodded automatically, her mind still spinning. "My name is Special Agent Carla Ruiz." The word didn't belong there. FBI. Not in a hospital room, not in her life. There must be a mistake, she whispered. But the agent didn't hesitate. There isn't. And just like that, the illusion shattered completely. Because this was never just about a DNA test. Never just about suspicion, or distance, or strange behavior. This was something much bigger. Something that had been building long before that hospital room. And as she looked toward the door, where he had just been taken away, one terrifying realization settled in. She didn't actually know the man she married. Not really. If this moment shocked you, don't scroll past it, because what comes next will reveal a truth far more disturbing than anything you've seen so far. Like and subscribe to stay with the story, because the next part will change everything. Just when she thought the nightmare had reached its peak, the truth took a darker turn. Because being arrested was only the beginning of who he really was. The room felt colder after they took him away, like the air itself had changed. The silence that followed wasn't the same suffocating tension as before. It was heavier, more real, like something irreversible had just happened. She sat there, still holding her baby, her hands trembling without control, trying to piece together what she had just witnessed. Police, a taser, a man running like he had something to hide. None of it matched the person she thought she knew. None of it made sense, until the woman stepped forward. Calm, composed, certain. "Mrs. Carter," she said again, softer this time. "My name is Special Agent Carla Ruiz." The words settled into the room slowly, like a truth her mind refused to accept all at once. FBI. It didn't belong here. It didn't belong in her life. "There's been a mistake," she repeated automatically, almost like saying it could make it true. But the agent's eyes didn't waver. "There hasn't." And that was when everything began to unravel in a way she couldn't stop. "How long have you known your husband as Daniel Carter?" The question didn't just confuse her, it shook her. "Known," she echoed, her voice unsteady. "We've been married for years. We were together long before that." The agent nodded slowly, as if confirming something she already knew. Then she placed a photograph gently on the blanket beside the baby. "The man you married is not Daniel Carter." For a moment the world didn't just spin, it fractured. Her eyes dropped to the photo. Same face, same eyes, same smile she had trusted, loved, built a life around. But beneath it, a different name. Michael Reeves. Her breath caught. No, that wasn't possible. It couldn't be. People don't just become someone else. Lives don't just get rewritten like that. But the agent continued, her voice, calm, steady, cutting through the denial forming in her chest. "We've been tracking him for years. Multiple identities, financial fraud, identity theft across several states." Each word hit like a weight, pressing down harder and harder until it became difficult to breathe. She felt like she was falling, except there was no ground to land on. Everything she thought was stable was gone. Every memory twisted into something unfamiliar. The way he handled finances, the way he avoided hospitals, the way he always seemed just a little too careful, too prepared. It wasn't personality, it was strategy. "He targets women with financial stability," the agent added quietly. "Builds trust, gains access, then disappears when he's taken what he needs." The room blurred. Her stomach turned. This wasn't just betrayal, it was design. Every anniversary, every promise, every late-night conversation, planned, calculated, used. And the most terrifying part, she hadn't seen it. Not once, not until now. Her arms tightened instinctively around her baby, as if grounding herself in something real, something untouched by lies. "What about my son?" she asked, her voice breaking for the first time. The agent's expression softened slightly. "We've already confirmed paternity." Relief hit her so suddenly, it almost hurt. Air rushed back into her lungs. For the first time in days, something inside her loosened. But it didn't last, because one question remained. Then why would he say that? Silence filled the room again. Not confused this time, but knowing, and slowly, painfully, the answer formed on its own. It was never about the baby. It was about control, about breaking her before she could stand, about making her doubt herself so deeply that she wouldn't fight back when everything else started disappearing. And suddenly, and the DNA test wasn't an accusation, it was a weapon. If this part made you stop and think, don't ignore it. Because what she uncovers next will reveal just how far his plan really went. Comment 3 if you're ready for the next part, because the truth is about to get even darker. Just when she thought she had finally reached the truth, she realized she had only uncovered the first layer of a much deeper deception. Because what hurts more than being lied to is discovering that the lie was never just about you. It was about many others before you, and many more who could come after. The file the agent carried wasn't just evidence. It was a map of destruction. Quietly, carefully, Agent Ruiz opened it on the small hospital table, turning each page like she was revealing pieces of a life that had never truly existed. Photographs, names, cities, different women, different stories, but somehow all the same pattern. Each face carried a version of the same expression: trust that had been broken too late. You weren't the first, Ruiz said gently. The words landed softly, but they cut deeper than anything else. Because until that moment, a small part of her still wanted to believe this was personal. That somehow, she had been uniquely targeted, uniquely betrayed. But this was systematic, calculated, repeated. She picked up one of the photographs, her fingers trembling slightly. A woman standing outside a suburban home, smiling at the camera, completely unaware of what was coming. Another photo showed a different woman, holding a child's hand, her face warm, the kind of person who trusted deeply. He builds relationships. Ruiz continued, her tone steady. Real ones, long enough to gain full access, financial, emotional, legal. The room felt smaller with every word. Then when the time is right, he takes everything. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Everything. Ruiz nodded once. Savings, credit lines, property, identity. The word echoed in her mind longer than the others, because suddenly she understood something terrifying. He didn't just steal money. He stole lives. He stepped into them, rewrote them, and walked away, leaving chaos behind like it was nothing. Her chest tightened as she looked down at her baby, sleeping peacefully, untouched by the truth unraveling around him. Does he always disappear? She asked quietly. Ruiz hesitated for the first time. Not always. That answer was worse, because it meant sometimes he stayed long enough to do more damage, more control, more destruction. The agent turned another page. We've identified multiple aliases, multiple financial networks, shell companies, and offshore accounts. Each term sounded distant, almost unreal, but together they painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a man living a double life. This was someone who had turned deception into a system, a profession, a weapon, and suddenly everything she had experienced, every strange behavior, every moment of unease, fit into a much larger structure she hadn't been able to see before. The calmness, the control, the calculated distance. It wasn't random. It was discipline. Why didn't I see it? She whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The question hung in the air, heavy and raw. Ruiz didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice softened. Because he didn't want you to. That was the truth no one talks about. Manipulation doesn't look like danger when you're inside it. It looks like care, like protection, like someone taking the weight off your shoulders so you don't have to question anything. And by the time you realize something is wrong, it's already been happening for far too long. She closed her eyes for a brief second, steadying her breath. This wasn't just about what he had taken, it was about what he almost took next. Her home, her future, her sense of reality. And then one final thought hit her, sharp, unavoidable. If he had done this before, how far had he planned to go this time? Because suddenly, this wasn't just a story about the past, it was a warning about what almost happened next. If this part made you realize how deep the truth really goes, don't look away. Because what comes next will reveal just how close she came to losing everything. What if the cruelest part of the story wasn't the lies, but the fact that everything was planned before she even realized she was in danger? Because once the truth came into focus, one detail stood out more than anything else. Had never been about love, doubt, or even betrayal. It had been about control from the very beginning. The accusation in the delivery room wasn't an emotional reaction. It was strategy. A calculated move designed to destabilize her at the exact moment she was most vulnerable. Think about it: exhausted after labor, physically weakened, emotionally overwhelmed, holding a newborn child while trying to process what just happened. That's not just a difficult moment. That's the perfect moment to break someone. And that's exactly what he was counting on. When Agent Ruiz explained it, the words felt almost unreal, like something out of a script too dark to belong in real life. He needed you unstable, she said calmly. If you appeared emotionally compromised after the birth, it would strengthen his position in any financial or legal dispute. The logic was chilling. He wasn't reacting to the situation, he was creating it. Every word he said, every distance he kept, every cold glance he gave, all of it was designed to push her into doubt, into confusion, into silence. Because someone who is questioning themselves doesn't question anything else. Someone who feels ashamed doesn't fight back. And suddenly everything made sense in the most terrifying way. The refusal to sign the birth certificate, the emotional withdrawal, the subtle pressure, the quiet manipulation. It wasn't random, it was preparation. While she was building a family, he was building a case. While she was trusting him, he was documenting her reactions, waiting for the moment she would break just enough to make his next move easier. And what was that move? Taking everything. The house, the accounts, the life they built together, except now she understood something even darker. It had never been they. It had always been him. She replayed the memory of his voice in her head, the calmness, the certainty. Get a DNA test. Not anger, not panic, just execution. Like he was checking off a step in a plan that had already been written long before that hospital room. Her stomach turned as the full realization settled in. He knew the baby was his. He knew she hadn't done anything wrong, and he still chose to weaponize that moment. Not because he believed it, but because it would work. That was the part that changed everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't even betrayal in the traditional sense. This was manipulation at a level so precise, so controlled it almost didn't feel human. And yet it happened, right in front of her, inside her own life. She looked down at her child, small, peaceful, completely unaware of the storm he had been born into. And something inside her shifted again, but this time it wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was clarity. Sharp, steady, unavoidable. Because once you understand that someone planned your pain, you stop blaming yourself for feeling it. And that changes everything. The shame begins to fall away. The doubt begins to loosen. And in its place, something stronger begins to rise. Not anger, not revenge, but awareness. The kind that can't be manipulated again. If this moment made you realize how calculated some people can be, don't keep it to yourself. Share this because someone else might need to see the signs before it's too late. What comes next will show just how far he was willing to go, and how she finally turned the story around. What if the moment you stop being the victim is the moment everything finally begins to change? Because after the shock, after the truth, after the collapse of everything she thought was real, something unexpected happened. She didn't break. She didn't disappear. She didn't stay silent. Instead, she made a decision that would turn the entire story in a different direction. It didn't happen loudly. There was no dramatic declaration, no sudden surge of strength, like in the movies. It happened quietly, almost unnoticed, sitting at a small kitchen table days after leaving the hospital, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Agent Ruiz sat across from her, a thick folder between them, filled with evidence, timelines, and names that now felt connected to her life in ways she never imagined. "We can move forward without you," Ruiz said carefully. "But with your help, we can do much more." The words hung in the air, not pressure, not expectation, just truth. And for a moment she hesitated, because helping meant reliving everything, every lie, every detail, every moment she had missed. It meant turning her pain into evidence. But then she looked toward the other room, where her baby slept peacefully, unaware of the storm that had nearly consumed their lives. And suddenly the decision wasn't about fear anymore. It was about purpose. "Tell me what you need," she said quietly. And just like that, everything shifted. The days that followed didn't feel like healing, not at first. They felt like reconstruction. Piece by piece, memory by memory, she began to revisit her past with new eyes. Things she once dismissed as small or unimportant became critical. The way he changed phones regularly, the way he avoided paper trails, the trips that didn't quite make sense, the accounts she never fully understood. At first it was overwhelming, but slowly patterns began to emerge, not just for the investigators, but for her. And with each pattern, something inside her grew stronger. Not because the past hurt less, but because it made more sense. Agent Ruiz visited often, sometimes officially with questions and files, sometimes just with food, knowing she hadn't eaten properly. There was no rush, no pressure, just a steady process of turning confusion into clarity. And then came the breakthrough. One afternoon, while searching through old documents, she found something hidden in an envelope tucked beneath paperwork he thought she would never revisit. Inside were passports. Multiple. Different names. Same face. Her hands started shaking before she even fully understood what she was holding. That discovery changed everything. Within days, investigators connected the aliases to offshore account shell companies and financial networks that stretched far beyond what they initially believed. The case grew, stronger, wider, more undeniable, and for the first time since the hospital, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel again: control. Not over the past, not over what he had done, but over what came next. She wasn't just answering questions anymore. She was helping build the truth, and with every detail she uncovered, the story shifted further away from him, and closer to her strength, to her voice, to her ability to stand in something that once tried to destroy her and reshape it into something that could protect others. Because this was never just about one man. It was about a pattern that needed to be exposed, and she became part of that exposure, not because she had to, but because she chose to. If this moment showed you how powerful it is to rise after being broken, don't scroll past it. Like and subscribe to follow what happens next, because the closer they get to the truth, the more dangerous it becomes. You'd think justice would feel like a loud, triumphant ending, but in reality, it arrives quietly, and sometimes it feels nothing like victory. The courtroom was colder than she expected, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Every sound echoed too clearly: the shuffle of papers, the low murmur of voices, the distant click of shoes against polished floors. It didn't feel like closure, it felt like exposure. Because for the first time, everything that had been hidden was about to be laid out in front of strangers. He walked in without hesitation, calm, composed, almost confident. Like this was just another situation he could control. That was the part that unsettled her the most. Not fear, not regret. Just the same cold certainty she had seen in the hospital room. For a brief moment their eyes met, and in that moment she understood something chilling: he still believed he could win. The trial didn't begin with drama. It began with questions. Simple, structured, carefully designed questions that slowly built a picture piece by piece. Financial records were presented. Transactions traced, accounts linked. One expert after another explained how money had moved, how identities had been constructed, how patterns had repeated across multiple victims. Each detail felt like a thread, and together they formed a web too tight to escape. Then came the testimonies. Women from different places, different lives, all telling stories that sounded disturbingly familiar. The charm, the trust, the gradual shift into control, the disappearance. Some spoke steadily, others struggled to hold their voice together. But every story carried the same weight: the realization that what they thought was love had been used against them. She listened, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart heavy, but steady. Because for the first time she wasn't alone in her experience. This wasn't just her story. It was a pattern, and patterns can be proven. When it was her turn, the room seemed to shrink. The air felt heavier, the silence sharper. The defense tried to frame her as unstable, overwhelmed, unreliable. A woman recovering from childbirth, confused by stress, misinterpreting events she didn't fully understand. It was subtle, but deliberate. Because doubt is easier to plant than truth is to prove. But something had changed in her. She didn't rush her words. She didn't react emotionally the way they expected. Instead, she spoke clearly, carefully. "He didn't accuse me because he believed it," she said. "He accused me because he needed me to doubt myself." The shift in the room was immediate, not loud, but undeniable. because that sentence reframed everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was intention. And intention is hard to defend. Then came the moment no one could ignore. The recording, his voice played through the speakers, calm and unmistakable. If she falls apart emotionally after the birth, the house becomes easier to take. No one moved, no one spoke. The words hung in the air heavier than any evidence that had come before. Because this wasn't interpretation. It wasn't assumption. It was him, his plan, his voice. And in that moment, whatever control he thought he had disappeared. The verdict didn't feel dramatic. It felt inevitable, guilty, count after count, each one landing like a final confirmation of what had been building all along. He didn't react much, but she saw it: the small tension in his jaw, the slight shift in his posture, cracks in the control he had maintained for so long. And for the first time, she didn't feel fear when she looked at him. She felt distance, real distance, because whatever power he once had over her was gone, completely. If this part made you rethink what justice really looks like, don't keep it to yourself. Comment your thoughts, because what comes after justice is something even more important, and it might not be what you expect. What if the real ending of the story isn't about revenge, but about who you become after everything is taken from you? Because long after the courtroom emptied and the headlines faded, her life didn't magically fix itself. There was no sudden moment where everything felt okay again. Healing didn't arrive like a victory. It arrived quietly in small, almost invisible pieces. It looked like waking up in the middle of the night to check if her baby was breathing, not because something was wrong, but because fear had rewired her instincts. It looked like opening bills with a steady hand, even when her heart raced, learning to face numbers she once avoided. It looked like standing in her own home, the same home he almost took, and slowly realizing it still belonged to her. Not perfectly, not completely restored, but still hers. And that mattered more than she expected. The first few months were the hardest. Not just because of the financial damage or the legal aftermath, but because of something deeper: the loss of trust in her own judgment. She questioned everything, every memory, every decision. How did I not see it? The question followed her everywhere. But over time, something began to shift. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough to notice. She started recognizing the difference between ignorance and deception. She hadn't failed to see the truth, he had worked to hide it. And that realization didn't just bring relief. It brought strength. Because if the problem wasn't her ability to trust but his ability to manipulate, then she wasn't broken. She had been targeted. And targeted people can recover. They can rebuild. Slowly, her life began to take shape again. Mornings became routines instead of chaos. Evenings became quieter, calmer. Her child grew, laughed, reached for her with the kind of pure trust that reminded her what real connection looked like. And through that, she learned something she hadn't expected. Trust wasn't gone. It just needed to be placed differently, carefully, intentionally. She returned to work not as the same person who had left, but as someone sharper, more aware. She noticed things she once overlooked. She trusted her instincts in ways she never had before. And that awareness didn't make her fearful, it made her grounded. Then something unexpected happened. Other women began to reach out. Quiet messages, hesitant conversations, stories that sounded too familiar. Control disguised as care. Isolation disguised as protection. Doubt disguised as love. She listened, not as someone above them, but as someone who had been there. And in those conversations, she found a new kind of purpose. Because survival isn't just about moving on. Sometimes it's about reaching back and helping someone else find their way out. One evening, she received a letter. The handwriting was familiar. Too familiar. Her hands paused before opening it. Inside, there were no real apologies, no true understanding. Just carefully chosen words, still trying to shape how she saw him. And near the end, one request. He wanted to see his son. For a moment, doubt returned, not about him, but about herself. Would she be wrong to say no? Would her child one day question that decision? But then she remembered everything. Not just what he had done, but how deliberately he had done it. And she understood something clearly. Forgiveness does not require access. Protecting her child was not punishment, it was responsibility. So she wrote a simple response, calm, final. He is safe, loved, and protected. That is enough. And when she sealed the envelope, she didn't feel anger. She didn't feel guilt. She felt something far more powerful. Peace. Real peace. Not because the past had changed, but because it no longer controlled her future. If this ending made you realize that strength doesn't come from never falling, but from rising differently, share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the most powerful ending is becoming someone no one expected you to be.